Hey everyone, so at long last I've got my March wrap up for you, so please keep on watching to find out what I read in March and also to see what is in this package that I just picked up in the mail today. So before COVID-19 happened, I was on a roll to read a bunch of books in March. And then the pandemic hit, which means that I actually only ended up finishing 2 books, and I'm going to talk about them really briefly right now. So the first book that I finished in March was The Good Luck Girls, written by Charlotte Nicole Davis. I did a full review of The Good Luck Girls, so if you'd like to find out what I thought from a 7 calorie shell perspective, then you can definitely check out my video. I will have it somewhere up here in the cards. But as an overview, I really enjoyed this book, and I would definitely recommend the book to you. 3 words that I would use to describe The Good Luck Girls would be adventure, thrilling, and touching. This felt like a very kind of feminist, Afro, retro, futurist fantasy story with a little bit of like horses and cowboy activity. What I can remember feeling while reading this book was a sense of like freedom and girl power and rising up against the patriarchy. I really loved that. There was a kind of political collective action kind of feeling as well. There was also like a tinge of, you know, little Orphan Annie in there for those who were born in a decade. So I really enjoyed it. I think I would recommend that if you were a fan of books like Dread Nation, it kind of felt like it shared a similar world, and I know Dread Nation had its issues, so I'll just leave that there in terms of Indigenous representation, but I would definitely say that I did enjoy this, and I would recommend it, and I would definitely look forward to the sequel. I did make some notes. Yes. So each of the main characters in this story, so there's a group of girls who run away from a good luck house, which is where they have to perform sexual services for men. So that obviously there's sexual violence and that's triggering. So be careful if that's a trigger for you when you read this story. And they're basically on the run, right? They want to find freedom. And so I guess that's sort of like the feminist aspect of it in a way. But each of the girls, once they become Good Luck Girls, they get renamed as flowers. And the flowers were Aster, Violet, Tansy, Mallow, and Clementine. And so each of those flowers, if you actually look up what the flowers mean, if you're a witchy person or somebody who works with floral essences, each of the flowers could have some sort of connection to the characters. So I found that out after I finished reading because somebody had put a comment in my video that there were some correspondences between the flowers and the character names. So I really enjoyed that, and I was inspired by these characters, these young, mostly Black, some queer characters who were just trying to move to another stage of existence. So that felt really good. I enjoyed it, and I'm happy that I had the opportunity to read it. I received this as an ARC, and it was one from Raincoast Books, so I'm thankful that I received this, and yeah, I would definitely say take a look at that. The other book that I read in March was How Long Till Black Futures Month, and this is N.K. Jemison's first collection of short stories. I think that there were about 22 short stories in this collection, and it was over 400 pages, almost 400 pages. So there were a lot of stories in this collection, and I will not lie to you, it was difficult to get through the collection. As you know, I have short story collection issues. I really need to be in the mood for short stories because, especially when you've got a master world builder like N.K. Jemisin, when every story requires you to bend and shape your mind to the framework that the author has created, it can become a little tiring or disorienting, right? In an imaginative kind of way. It can be disorienting to go from one world to another. And I did feel that way because this book has a number of varieties of stories, like different types, different genres, different feels, different lengths. And so it was hard to get through. And I was also reading it during quarantine pages and after the pandemic, and with my mind being so consumed by the quick change of the progression of the virus and everything politically that was happening on a day-by-day basis, it wasn't the best time to be swept and pulled in different directions as a result of a collection of short stories. So my timing wasn't great, but I'm not really good at stopping books, so I just had to push through it. So it was a challenging read for me in that way. Now, I will say that I was left feeling like I wanted more from some of these stories, and not in a good way. What I mean by that is sometimes you read a short story and you're just breathless after it's done, and you wish that it had been longer and that you could continue on in the world. And it's a good feeling. It's like, oh, that was so good. I want that. I want more of that, right? There's that. And then there are stories that are short, and when you're done, you're kind of like, oh, there are too many loose ends, and I don't exactly understand how this world works, and I'm not quite finished yet. I'm not ready to leave this story, and it's more of a feeling of being unrequited, right? And that's how I felt about some of the stories as well. Now, the lowest rated story in here, I gave 2.5 out of 5 stars for those of you who like 5-star ratings. But there were many stories that I rated 5 out of 5 stars, and even one that was 6 out of 5 stars. So I want to tell you about those stories so that if you haven't read this book, you can get a taste maybe of what stories are in the collection and what you might like. So the first one is The Narcomancer. What I loved about this story was that it was a bit of a road trip story. It involved a world where there are more than 2 genders, and there's sort of like a priesthood of people who can control a particular kind of magic, and they go from world to world to assist, from community to community to assist with healing. And this particular priesthood, they're not supposed to love. And I think it's because that love can take energy away from them that they should be using and directing towards their calling. So this particular story has a kind of romance thing happening, and it's slow burn, and it is so very, very interesting. And so I really enjoyed that story. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. The second story that I rated really high was Henosis. This was a really quick story, and this one reminded me of conversations that I've heard authors have about fans who are inappropriate. And in this world, I think there are negative consequences to being a best-selling author, and so that's all I can really say because it's so short, but it was really interesting. The third story was called Too Many Yesterdays and Not Enough Tomorrows. And I've learned that there is I guess a trope or a story arc that I'm quite attracted to that I didn't realize I was. And this is more of the science fiction on the tech side, the sort of online inside the internet string theory kind of quantum situation. So basically this story is told from the perspectives of a group of, I guess, individuals or singularities that exist inside of the internet, like in a chat room that's on a loop, and they're all talking to each other and trying to figure out sort of how they got there and where people are disappearing to. And that's all I can really say about it, but that was really interesting and it was so touching. There's something about disembodied characters who exist inside of like a mainframe or out in the cloud that really intrigues me, because I don't know a lot about coding or anything like that. As you can see, I'm even struggling with describing this to you, but that was really cool. And I think there was a story like that in Friday Black as well. But I'm starting to get really attracted to stories about characters that exist either as like AI or inside of the world that we now see as technology. It raises a lot of interesting questions about ownership and self-determination and all of those things. I think that's probably why people are attracted to science fiction stories like, you know, the Murderbot stories, like, you know, where you've got questions about our artificial intelligences, people, and that kind of thing. And then there was the Red Dirt Witch, which I also rated 5 out of 5 stars. Oh boy, that one made me cry. That is a story, it's about a lot of things, but what drew me to that story was one of the characters, which is a little black girl who makes a decision that her mother doesn't want her to make. She makes a sacrifice because she's able to see the future, and she's able to see a future and realizes that her sacrifice is necessary to that future becoming. And the future that she sees is our future, is our present. What I loved about that story, because it was set in the past and it views us now as the future, so there's an Afro-retrofuturism about it. But what I love about that is that the story forced me to see the joy and the hope that exists in this present historical moment. And that was amazing. It was amazing. In addition to that, I love seeing white women portrayed as evil witches in stories, in opposition to black women, because that's not a thing that happens enough. And I found it really interesting to see how N.K. Jemisin created the character of that particular person. Yeah, so I really enjoyed that story. So I gave that 5 out of 5 stars. Would I recommend this book to you? Yes, I would. I would recommend that you read this short story collection. But I think the main question is why? Why would I recommend this to you? N.K. Jemisin is changing the game. She is changing science fiction, speculative fiction, and fantasy. She's a must-read for anyone who wants to be well-versed in Black science fiction and fantasy. I don't think you can have an intelligent conversation about where, whoa, those are fighting words. Those are fighting words, but I truly believe that you can't have an intelligent conversation about the direction of Black science fiction and fantasy right now without talking about N.K. Jemisin. You cannot. She is doing things with her writing that we need to know about and pay attention to. So she's a insta buy for me, and she's a must read. But more than that, why I think you should pick up this collection and read it is because people talk about Black science fiction and fantasy as being genre bending. they talk about the fact that you sometimes can't properly categorize what we produce. And I think there's a reason for that. And I think the reason is because when you're an oppressed people, and when you're a people that experiences marginalization on a regular basis, you're constantly relying on otherworldly skills in order to survive, right? And when your own existence, when your own success is a fantasy to others, then you are constantly in the world of the speculative. So as an example, like Samuel R. Delany once described one of his stories, which is a story that involves a community of gay men, a polyamorous, sex-positive community of gay men that live like in a field somewhere, in a forest somewhere. And someone asked him if, actually that someone was me. I was interviewing Samuel R. Delany, and I asked him if he described his worlds as Afrofuturist. Of course, he started writing a very long time ago, before we started talking about Afrofuturism in the way that we do right now. And he said to me, a world where Black gay men who are sex positive and who are polyamorous, in a world where you can have a whole bunch of those men living together safe, that actually is science fiction and fantasy to some people. That is Afrofuturism, right? Because of all of the violence that these individuals face in our present. So if you're imagining them well and safe and happy and satisfied, then that actually is a world that we haven't yet seen, right? So there is something to be said about collections written by people like N.K. Jemisin, who are starting to imagine, not starting to, but are currently imagining cities, political systems, magical systems that center Black people, really putting us back into the picture. And it's really hard to pin down her writing as science fiction or fantasy or speculative or whatnot, because it has a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So her stories will take you to a number of different places, and they might actually elude classification. And that is a really pleasing experience if you're ready to explore the parts of Afrofuturism or Black speculative fiction that are hard to define. So pick it up. You're gonna not like some of the stories, you're gonna like other stories, but that's, you know, that's what happens. So I would recommend that you read that. That was long. So the 3 words that I would use to describe the collection of short stories would be immersive, variety, and dense. I am not going to be doing a 7 cowrie shell review of this short story collection, because I said a lot just then, and also because the rating system doesn't really work really well for short story collections unless there's a thread that ties all the stories together. And besides these stories being written by N.K. Jemisin, I don't think that there really is. I'm just looking at the introduction to see if there's anything here that I wanted to share with you, but I don't. Yeah, so what she says here, short stories gave her the space to experiment with unusual plots and story forms, like future tense, epistolic format, Black characters, that she would have thought were too risky in the past. So she really, she sort of says here, these are all these stories where I was doing something different. I was doing something that I didn't think would sell. I was doing something that I was told was not science fiction. Here they all are, and aren't they great? And they are. All right, so those were the two books that I read in March before ish hit the fan, I would recommend them both. And the last thing that I'm going to do before moving on to what will probably be part 2 of this video is open some mail that I got today. I think it's a book. We shall see. Part 2 of this video is going to be a video that takes you to my collection of Black science fiction and fantasy, specifically to books that I have read but have not reviewed, because I need a little help from my friends so that I can figure out the order in which I will upload and review and upload books. Okay, so I don't know what that is. Okay, so this is Odes to the Multiverse, Speculative Fiction Omnibus. So I'm just going to read the back. Tanya R. Moore writes speculative, short, and serial fiction. Born and raised in Jamaica, she hopes to bring a fresh, new West Indian perspective to the science fiction, fantasy, and horror universes. So, and then it says punk, sci-fi, space opera, horror, and urban fantasy vignettes and short stories featuring cosmic tales of distant worlds and strange futures where earthbound horrors unfold. This omnibus invites you to marvel at the macabre and maleficent and embrace the weird and wonderful. I have to say, points for alliteration, Tanya R. Moore. I believe that this is independent. Yeah, it is an indie. And the last story, Space Age Mermaid, so you know I love it. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to reading this collection. It looks like, oh, the first story is called Mermaid. Excellent. Yeah, it looks like they're, yeah, there's a little note that says, what happens in your wildest dreams? Yeah, I'm ready for this. Look at the eyes on the main character on the cover. Cool, huh? All right, so that is it. There's a little box of something, and I don't know what that is. It might be related to the book, so it is not. So we'll go from there. I want to thank you very much for watching my March 2020 wrap up before everything went wild because of COVID-19. If you have watched this all the way to the end, I would ask you to put an umbrella emoticon or an umbrella icon in the description, and let me know if you've read Good Luck Girls or How Long Till Black Future Month and what you thought about it. And I would also like to shout out the Locked Booktician. I have had the opportunity of getting to know her a little bit through the screen on Quarantined Pages. She's got a great channel that is on its way to having 200 subscribers. It's probably past that at this point. She is hilarious. She is full of joy. She's a Black woman who sometimes will review books in Ukrainian. Yes, I said it, Ukrainian. So definitely check out her channel and give her a lot of love. She's great. Thanks very much for watching. Remember to read with purpose. See ya.